Before we begin, let's take a moment to highlight a core value we all share across our industry: safety. Just a few quick housekeeping notes. In the event of an emergency, please follow instructions from the staff and exit through the doors clearly marked with the exit sign and blinking right now. Kindly switch off or silence your mobile devices. Please note that this session is streamed and recorded. During the Q&A, simply raise your hand and a microphone will be brought to you. And for those active on social media, the official event hashtag is #EPCA59. We invite you to join the conversation. Finally, we would like to remind everyone of our EPCA do's and don'ts. As you're all aware, we must refrain from discussing any sensitive market information. Compliance with competition law is not just expected, it's one of EPCA's core values. We would like to thank our sponsor and media partners. Without you, this event is not possible. Thank you. And now, without further ado, let's begin.
Good morning, everyone. Nice to see you. I know it's very early, but I'm happy to see you here in our supply chain and logistics session on this nice day on the EPCA. I'm Sanja Magdeburg. I'm the chairperson of the Supply Chain Program Committee of EPCA, and I'm VP Supply Chain EMEA for Brenntag Specialties. Together with I need to push it. There was something. Together with Samuel Alonso from LKW Walter, please stand up for a moment and show you. I'm leading the supply chain committee. We are a very diverse group of logistics service providers, shippers, digital companies, and also ACTA and CEFIC, and of course the support of Lydia and Elena from EPCA. And this group really makes us diverse. So we have a lot of different perspectives and we have a lot to offer. We are not just preparing the annual session here from a supply chain perspective. We are on top of that working on several initiatives which we will briefly show you now. One of our initiatives is the intermodal transportation network. This is led by Marnix Mondria from LyondellBasell and Jan Arnett from Vereecke. What we are investigating is how can we work together to improve and accelerate the shift to intermodal transportation in Europe. Because intermodal transportation, even if sometimes we are struggling, of course, due to the German network, for example, it still is a big lever for CO2 emission reduction, resilience, and also an answer to the driver shortage that we structurally face. This intermodal transportation network has conducted 2 workshops so far and is conducting in November another workshop. Here you see some impressions. So we had the chance to get shippers, LSPs, and other parties on the table discussing and working really on tangible plans and results that they can take back to their companies for enhancing and developing on intermodal transportation. Another group we formed under the SCPC is the digitalization group. This group is led by Frederick Ronse from Ovinto and Birte Neding from Helm. Here we are focusing on what is needed to accelerate the sector's digital transformation. With this group, we are at the moment evaluating what we are going to be focusing on. It's quite newly found, but more to come and more to expect. So what can happen is that we conduct workshops or that we give content, let's say, to our EPCA members on how to enhance digitalization further, because it remains to be an important factor and we are going to be talking later as well about it. The third group we have under the SCPC is the adaptability subgroup. Here we are facing on everything around the response to disruption, volatility, and also how do we support from the supply chain perspective the long-term changes that we are facing and the competitiveness in Europe. This group is led by Patrick Hoare from Möller-Maersk. and by Peter van Egerscott from Dow. Also here, the group is found this year, and more to come from our side. What our general aim is to provide content and also to provide, let's say, stages and opportunities for our EPCA member community, so for you, to be discussing on exactly this topic and to develop for the industry. Today we are going to be talking about the topic of resilience and about volatility and circularity. And I have three wonderful people with me on stage. Hans Augustine, President of Stolt Tank Containers, Tabitha Verbock from Dow Chemicals, and Vereecke, Professor of Vlerick Business School. So we are talking about three things that are somehow connected with each other. We have been deciding to shape this session this year differently than in the past. In the past, we are, let's say, having a lot of content from consultants, a lot of content, of course, from universities. And this year, we start with a mixture. So we wanted to give the stage to our member companies to share really tangible projects, tangible, let's say, results they delivered in order to improve and to give, let's say, their experience to this company, so it's learning from each other as the approach. And one thing I missed, but I would like to ask the SCPC members to briefly stand up and show their face to the audience. So exactly, these are the shippers, LSPs, etc., that are member of the SCPC, and there are many more, as you saw on the slide. All right, then I would already hand over to our first speaker, to Hans. Hans is president of Stolt Tank Containers. He is since 2022 in his role and working on I shouldn't script myself so much, but leading the company's global network and strategic growth, and has over 2 decades of logistics and shipping experience. Sorry, Hans, for introducing you in that way. And you're going to be talking about resilience, flexibility, scalability, and visibility in order to have an answer to the volatility we have. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for that introduction. And I think I do what all of us do here. We're serving the customer, and that's what we're trying to do in Stolt-Nielsen as well. But then, particularly pleased that we got the opportunity to talk here today. As was mentioned, we just like to share some of the experiences that we have in logistics and in supply chain, especially with a lot of volatility that we're all experiencing. So I think in the header of this session, it talks about practical insights. So we try to get a bit practical about how we manage supply chains in these times. But first, I see many familiar faces. So I think many of you know us and know our company. And when I figure out how this thing works. So Stolt-Nielsen. So for those of you who don't know, we are in liquid logistics. Actually, we call ourselves global pioneers in liquid logistics. Why is that? So we operate quite a number of assets within the liquid logistics and supply chain sphere. So I'm president of Stolt Tank Containers. We're market leader in the ISO tank business. We operate about 52,000 tanks. We have 21 depots, 24 offices all around the world to be close to our customers. But we work also close together with the other divisions in Stolt-Nielsen, and that's what I will talk about a bit today. We have Stolthaven, and actually Pim is here from Stolthaven, who you just saw. We have 15 storage terminals around the world, and then you probably know Stolt Tankers, 150 tankers with a global network, barging business, interregional. So it's really a global business, and with that, indeed, we move basically any liquid, but of course very relevant to your businesses of what we do here in EPCA. So that's us. But how do we then fit into into the world. So I think on the left you see a picture of our global network. You see a picture of the dark blue, the terminals we have around the globe. You see with the blue, you see our ISO tank container depots. But actually, the key is actually all the yellow arrows here. That's the tankers, the ISO tanks, but basically your products moving around the world. But it also taps us into how do we then manage that together in these volatile times? Because I think for all of us, you know, coming out of COVID, which clearly was a big disruption when it came to supply chains, we've seen so many disruptions happening. We couldn't believe that the Red Sea is closed. We had a Panama Canal drought. We have the tariff changes. But also in other parts, in smaller and bigger, there is a lot of pressure on global supply chains. Now, what I would like to talk about in the next couple of slides is now how do we deal with that? Because I think it's, you know, it used to be like that. Sometimes there would be one big disruptive event, but there seem to be many of them happening. Now, you know, with all of us together here in the room, how do we work on this? And of course, we also understand, especially being in a European market, that yes, you need to have a resilient supply chain, but it's also key that you're competitive. Can those two things come together? Because actually your efficiency gets under pressure, and you don't want to build too much buffer into your network because normally that leads to extra cost. We think actually, and there's a couple of examples that you can do both. But it's of course it's a fine line. But the three things that I wanted to talk, at least what we try to do together with our customers, is three things: work on flexibility, especially in a volatile environment, making sure that you have the flexibility in your network to adjust. Look at scalability. We see, and I think it's also for many of you in the room here, that scale matters when it comes to resilience, because you can build in buffers in your bottlenecks. You have choke points that you can plan around, but you need a certain, you know, size to do that. And then there's a lot about visibility. And when I talk about visibility, it's both on the planning part. So how do we now sit together and get real insights in the flows, in the products, in the customer demands, in the changes? So a lot of visibility there, but also what is happening on visibility in the execution. How can we leverage data, digital tools to predict, to forecast, and to execute the product? And I'll talk a little bit about how we do that, very much these three things together between us, because I think that's kind of the hidden message below this slide, is that to deal with volatility and to look at flexibility, scalability, and visibility, it's basically all players in the supply chain who need to come together to make that happen. But also there I have some practical ideas on it. Good. Then when we talk about flexibility, I just had, because I think this session was called Practical Insights, so I just want to share a couple of examples that we've seen recently on how do we now make sure that we're flexible into the supply chain. And the example here is a situation which is probably with some of you working globally quite familiar, but this is a use case of one of our customers, where actually we had the tariffs happening, and we got together with the customer and said, okay, but now the product is moving, it's on the water. How do we deal with this? So we have basically the standard flows are being executed, but because in this case of tariff policy, we had to change the flow. In this case, this was an Asia to US flow. There was quite a steady flow of product on the water, but because of the tariff issue, those products would basically be uncompetitive. So we got together. The cargo was on the water. You know, it was destined for the consignee, but we actually were able together with the customer to go and divert the traffic into another location, thereby avoiding that. Well, basically the product would be uncompetitive and would be in the wrong market. I think that is something which I think previously in kind of a logistics setup, you know, when your product is moving, it's moving, and then that's it. These times call for greater flexibility. So the way we work together with our customers and with our partners is to build that in. Because of course, in order to do this, you need to make sure that you get together quickly, that you have an alternative available, and that there is some capacity available in your network to divert products. But eventually, I think we all know with the tariffs, it's been a bit up and down. But actually, in a quite fast way, we were able to respond to that. Then the other one, so that was an example of scalability. Yeah? So get together quick, make sure you have alternatives, and within the supply chain, don't be too rigid in your execution. Then the second one is the scalability, and that's I spoke about it in the opening. Is that you need to be competitive, so it means that you cannot have buffer everywhere in your supply chain because it would get very expensive. But for instance, if you look at what happened when the Red Sea closed, if you have enough assets available, so in our case, there's enough in your critical bottleneck markets. We have enough storage space for you. We have enough ISO tanks for you. We have enough parcel tanker capacity for you in those key lanes, because you know that there's some lanes that are more critical than others. Then actually we're able to respond quite quickly. So in this case, the Red Sea closes. We had to reroute the product around the Cape of Good Hope. But actually, by an early engagement, we could get the assets in the right place. We could optimize the network, scale it, and actually the product, of course, you have a longer lead time. But we didn't have the issues that we had, for instance, in the COVID time, that we basically would run out of capacity. And that's, I think today what we're seeing a lot in our discussions with customers is just to make out what are those choke points, what is really critical to see your supply chain, and are there specific places where we need to make sure we have extra capacity available. Not across the network, because we would make the cost position in the network inefficient, but in some of those critical places, do we then make, let's say, an adjustment? Because an adjustment is better than a crisis. But again, as I mentioned also from the opening, it's very much about sitting together, understanding each other's flows, understanding each other's network, and saying, okay, maybe here we need to invest in extra capacity. Maybe here we need to do something extra without, making players lose their competitiveness. And I think, of course, competitiveness is a word that is on everyone's mind. So those are, only those trade-offs you can make together. But again, an example: Red Sea closed, extra capacity deployed, and actually, indeed, it felt less like a crisis than what we had seen in earlier times, where maybe we may have cut the capacity a little bit too thin and not be able to respond to our customers' needs. And then the third example, which is a bit more, a real practical one, I just wanted to show you. We operate in both ISO tanks and parcel tankers. And actually, with many customers, we're discussing, well, what's now actually the best mode of transport, and when do we carry what, how? And that's where the visibility comes in. And I just want to give you a practical example. I mean, there's many of these, but this is one. So I had up ISO tanks, and I'm going to show you an example where the ISO tank doesn't win. So it's in the old days it would hurt me because I lead the ISO tank division. So of course what I do is sell ISO tanks. I think what we now see is that we really need to open our mind to say, well, what's actually best for the customer? And like, for instance, in this case, we actually moved product to another mode of transport because that was better for the customer. So for me, as president of the tank container division, not so good. I think for our customer, very good. And eventually, I think as Stolt-Nielsen, we try to offer solutions in any corridor. Because what happened here was that this is an import leg, so I mean, it can also be on an export leg, but we just took an import leg into Europe, is that you see a customer who has 3 source locations. So they basically serve a lot of hubs that they have in Europe, but they don't have one location and one consolidation point in Europe. They actually need to go quite a lot of import locations, and those are the red dots that you see. But you also see that their origins are quite widespread. There's some that get sourced from Europe, but then they also have sourcing from the Middle East and from the US Gulf, which are also markets where, of course, there's quite a bit of volatility in those origins. They've used for years ISO tanks because they thought that was the easiest way to do it, because actually you go from many points to many points, so you go actually in low quantities. So best thing is to do ISO tanks, and for me in the ISO tank business that was perfect. The only thing that if you really looked at the customer, they were struggling to really keep the product moving and also to be competitive in some of these lanes. So when we then talk about visibility, we got together with the customer. We looked at the data, well, there is some. We have within Stolt-Nielsen, we have an optimization and network group to work together and look. Okay, if you now would be mode agnostic, how would you feed the European market? What would that mean to your reliability, and what would that mean to your cost? And what we actually figured out was that because of this setup, and I've seen the opposite happening with other customers, is actually the better way is to actually feed it into a hub in Moerdijk in Rotterdam, and from there do the local distribution for North Europe, and do the same basically in Barcelona. So instead of moving it into an ISO tank, there were some flows which were big enough to actually consolidate, one in South Europe, one in North Europe, and do the local distribution into Europe. And actually, in this case, we got quite a significant cost saving out of it. But because of some congestion in Europe on the container side, we were also able to offer a more reliable product to the customer. For some shipments, we found out that it didn't work. So actually what we agreed with the customer was, okay, some of the trunk lanes we move into parcel tanker and we hub from Moerdijk and Barcelona. But there's maybe some smaller shipments, quick shipments, that we still move into ISO tank. Now, of course, production processes change. Cost of ISO tanks, road transport, parcel tanker storage, that changed. So actually, the key also in these visibility studies is to stay in touch with each other, see how cost and how flows develop, and then see maybe if I'm standing here a year from now, I will show you that this business may have moved again to another modality. But you know, the discussion here was practical insights. These were some of the practical insights in terms of, you know, visibility and in working with the customer. The other thing on visibility, of course, is the visibility on the execution side. And that's where we're seeing that actually with track and trace, with predictive track and trace, we have AI-enabled ETA forecasting. So actually, it's not about when we think it will get there, but it's when, you know, when we're pretty sure it will get there. In the visibility space, there's also a lot of developments. So if you now have this product, it's on the water, we are getting much better thanks to digital and thanks to AI, and then also forecasting when the product will arrive and how that will feed into the production process. So that was an example of visibility. So those are basically the three things for me. So how do we deal? Well, we deal very much together with all of you on this, because I think what you could see when it comes to resilience, when it's flexibility, when it's scalability, when it's visibility, all those three things you only can do to sit together as players in the supply chain, share the pain points, share the data, share the expectations, work on it, plan for it, and then also again adjust for it. So that was basically, you know, the insight that I wanted to share. Can resilience then become a competitive advantage? You know, it requires choice. It's not a one size fits all, but we believe that by doing this together, we can build that flexibility, scalability, and visibility into supply chains. So yeah, that was what I had.
Thank you, Hans. Thank you so much. This was very interesting. We will have a Q&A part later, so note down your questions in your mind. Now I would like to welcome on stage Tabitha Verbock from Dow. She's area president for Dow, drives strategic roles and stakeholder engagement across a big part of Europe, and is very experienced in end-to-end supply chain management. She will share her perspective on making local value chains competitive and future-proof. Welcome to the stage.
What's the clicker? Okay. Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. Hope you are. This, I think, is my earliest presentation ever at 8 o'clock or 8:30. Hope you all had safe travels and arrived here on time. For me, that was a bit more challenging with the cyber attacks, but resiliency in the end, also in the European air freight system. So I'm the area president for Dow. I will talk a bit more about my great company in a couple of minutes. And I'm going to give you more the external stakeholder perspective. So I had a part of my life I could work in supply chain, and it's still a big passion in my heart. But today I'm going to talk a bit more about what I see engaging with governments and also how our strategy is developing, because we have a lot of local manufacturing here in Europe. And as you probably already heard, there is a lot of pressure on the European chemical industry. So, but let's start with a simple question. Europe, can we compete still in 20 years with the US and Asia? Will there be local manufacturing in the chemical industry in Europe? I think there will be, and today there might be a bit of pessimism, as I also experienced that during the past days, on how the future will look like, but there are a lot of things we're working on, also with policy. There are also a lot of topics I will not discuss today, like energy costs and how we can tackle that. But I think future-proofing the supply chains will be at least part of the success for the European chemical producers in the future. Let's talk a bit more about my great company. So we are Dow, and I would describe us as kind of this workforce of diverse problem solvers. So problem solving is what we do every day. I think nowadays a bit more than ever, but we're very passionate about that. We are a global company. We have a global footprint. We're in all the 4 continents of the world, and I think that also is one of our strengths currently with all the trade implications and global developments in the geopolitical side. Europe has been, from historical perspective, a very important continent for Dow. We started here more than 60 years ago, and what we are kind of facing now after 60 years is kind of what I would say a reset of our footprint, a reset of the future of our manufacturing in Europe. I also want to discuss the products we make, because these products in the end will be very important also for resiliency from what we're doing in Europe here and what we're producing. So we would say we're making modern chemistry for everyday life. So consider products that you use, and we celebrated 60 years of Dow in Terneuzen this year, and we say in average you touch a Dow product 60 times a day. So this is all about the smartphones you keep in your hand. This is about food packaging. This is about transportation, parts in electrical vehicles, but also traditional vehicles. This is about wires and cables. This is about important stuff we need for all the transitions with the energy transition. This is about molecules that go into windmills in solar panels. So very important for every daily life, and also for the fun stuff like cosmetics, clothing, just to give you an idea on how important chemistry is still for daily life. So this is our presence in Europe. As you see, Europe, I already mentioned, is a very important part of our global footprint. And we have locations all over the European continent. What historically has been the strength of the chemical industry and also the clusters is mainly the integration. The European chemical industry is very integrated. We have these amazing industry parks or chemical clusters like Ludwigshafen, Antwerpen, Terneuzen is also one of those that were from historical built close to the sea rivers, the big seas, but also infrastructures like utilities on site, co-product sharing. All of these benefits really made the chemical industry very strong in Europe. Over the past years, however, and specifically I think since a couple of 5 to 10 years, that competitive position has started to change. But there is a lot I think we need to be aware of that we can still change. So of course we were facing a lot of new developments in Asia, in North America. I think where Europe was still optimizing our crackers, our production plants, we saw, in Texas building new cracker facilities from the shale gas. Asia was building amazing new integrated chemical facilities, and Europe was still optimizing. So we might have been sleeping a bit as well. But now, if you look to the current situation in the industry, this is an overview of CEFIC. They made this to show the competitiveness of our industry. Europe is the first line. I'm not sure if you can see all the diagrams there, but if you look to the US, if you look to China, you see what the integration there has done, what the development has done. You see a lot of green boxes on the competitiveness side. If you look to Europe, and a couple of those are, I think, very rare for you, like energy costs, policy, regulatory costs, policy framework, labor costs, you see the red boxes. But, and that's what I wanted to talk about today, there are a lot of green boxes, and those green boxes have always helped us to be competitive and also made the difference. And these green boxes are logistics costs, capital cost investments, innovation, human capital, and very important, the supply-demand ecosystem. If we do nothing, if we don't take action, all these green become red. So that's kind of, the do nothing, wait and see scenario. If we are continuously to invest in these green elements, I think there is a future proofing for the European supply chains and also for our manufacturing here in Europe. I will talk about 3 scenarios where I feel the future of the supply chains and also the chemical industry in Europe can benefit from. One is the resiliency. My colleague from Stolt, the previous speaker, already mentioned the Red Sea crisis. Having local manufacturing in Europe helped us a lot at that moment. We were not depending from the other continents. We had local manufacturing, we had local supply chain, we had a lot, we could build on. Another very important new geopolitical reality is also the defense developments. As you've seen, also in the past couple of weeks, defense has become a very important topic. So if I talk to governments, for them it's very important to keep chemical industry in Europe. We talked about the molecules, they want to keep that in Europe. They want to make sure chemical producers will stay in Europe because they don't want to be dependent on imports from other countries for defense industry. Another important opportunity that I see with this defense industry is not only producing molecules in Europe, it's also about the infrastructure that the defense industry and governments will make available. And I think that's an opportunity for all of you to consider. What are the defense infrastructures? How can we build that together with the new supply chains of the future? If there is a lot of investment in rail for defense, how can we benefit from that? So if you go away today, it makes sense perhaps to look at your country and consider what are these investments and how can we build together based on the new infrastructure and a better ecosystem. Then what we would say, closed loop supply chains. This is something that will happen. It's called circularity. Probably a lot of you are already considering this, but for us this is a very important element of our future-proofing supply chains in Europe. So the linear models will change and we will need to make way more use of our waste and producing and using the waste again to produce molecules. And if you want to do that, and we call it a materials ecosystem, is actually putting the waste back in the system. You also create new supply chains. A part of this is regulated, a part is of course with the kind of environmental perspectives and strategy that we want to do something useful with waste. It will help us also to become less dependent on feedstocks from other parts of the world. But putting that all back in the system creates a new material ecosystem. And we need new supply chains from that. Because these are the supply chains you want to keep local. You want to make sure that you use the local municipality waste. You use everything what is in your environment also to keep costs down. And this is an example, and I know the North Sea Ports is here as well today, but this is an example we're currently building from the Terneuzen location we have. So we're working closely with the whole cluster here to see what kind of waste is available, how can we bring that into the new system, how can we make new molecules out of waste and integrating that. And these are kind of the new eco models, and as you can see, they're very local. And then finally, you saw in the green boxes that human capital, innovation are absolutely key. So what do we need to do to kind of look at the future. Very important is we start looking at our people. People are, the core of everything, and I think the supply chain professionals, as I've seen them, are always very agile and adaptable, but probably we need to step up a bit more now. Upskilling, reskilling, making sure you understand what's going on, looking at supply chains in a different way, as we were talking about, the new infrastructure needs from defense, but also circular ecosystems are going to be key. So adaptability, agility of the supply chain professionals is going to be critical. And next to that, and Anne will talk more about that, is of course digital technology. I think the kind of opportunity here in Europe is to have this digital ecosystem, an open system where we all communicate with each other, make it really one, no borders, one European ecosystem, and that's going to be the strength of the future of the supply chains here, because that will make us agile, that will deliver real value, cost, service, people, productivity, and that's going to be the real differentiator for the next coming years. But very important we approach this as one European open ecosystem. So, as of today, I'm seeing a bit of opportunities, a bit of positivism. It's going to be tough. We need a lot of action, and we need specifically all of you as our partners to make this happen. But with that, I hope we can really future-proof the European supply chains for the chemical industry. Thank you.
Thank you, Tabitha. Our next person on stage is Anne Vereecke from Vlerick Business School. She's professor on operations and supply chain management, as well as manufacturing, and does a lot of research around technology and how technology transforms our operations. Today, she's going to be talking about how digital mature the chemical industry is. This is basing on a survey that we have done beforehand of the session, and how digitalization is helping to future-proof supply chains. Thank you so much. Here you click.
Yeah. Thank you, Sanja, and a very good morning to you. Indeed, Tabitha, an early morning. Very happy to be here, and I should actually say to be here back again. I have a long-standing collaboration with EPCA and had the pleasure of being at your annual meeting a couple of times. I'll actually refer to that in my 20 or so minutes that I'm gonna talk to you. Yes, well, I was asked to talk a little bit about how to future-proof your supply chain and how digitalization links to this. If I listen to the previous two speakers, and if I listen over coffees to all of you, it's clear that there's volatility, the word that Hans has been using, there's uncertainties, there's pressure all around. I'm not going to read them all to you, but the overall message is we have to be resilient, we have to be agile, we have to be flexible, to repeat the words of Hans. The question is, how can we do that? And I don't have the full answer, but at least I can give you a partial answer, because I believe that part of the answer lies in the visibility that we need to be able to quickly react. And again, this is something that Hans has been elaborating on. But just to give you an example, getting alerts when something happens in your supply chain is important to start to be resilient. Seeing patterns in data is important to be able to start to be resilient. And for that, I believe digital technology can help. There's pressure on our supply chains. Supply chains have to be more sustainable. I'll come back to that. At the same time, we have to reduce costs. We have to improve profitability. Well, we have to become more competitive. How can we do that? Well, again, I think digitalization is part of the answer to that. And then in some sectors, we struggle to find the right people, to find good people. digitalization is part of the answer. So, and I could continue a little longer on this, but in essence, the message I want to give is, let's think about how digitalization can help us improve and can help us become more resilient. Now, digitalization is more than just technology. At Vlerick Business School, we try to show this with this digital wheel. What it actually shows is that if you do it right, meaning if you have the right digital strategy in place, if you embed it in your products and in your processes, if you think about what governance do I need for this, if you think about can it bring me new business models, if you have the right people, the right talent, the right mindset in place, if you have the right leadership for it, many ifs, but if you do it right, it will bring profit, it will bring performance. And performance is not just profit or cost reduction. Performance is also performance on the aspects of sustainability, which in itself is two different aspects. On the one hand, the societal impact of it, the people impact of it, and on the other hand, the ecological impact of it. So people, planet, and profit, all three can benefit from having a strong approach towards digitalization and digital transformation. And having that right will make you more resilient and will, in the end, lead to sustainable and profitable growth. That's somehow the belief that that we have. Now, what makes me say so? I want to share with you, Sanja was already referring to a bit of a survey that we've done prior to this conference, so many of you have responded to this, but also companies from other sectors have responded to this. We actually have over 300 responses to it. We have been asking, in essence, two sets of questions there. We have been asking on a set of key performance indicators, how important are they? And at the same time, we've also been asking, and to what extent does digital technology contribute to reaching that performance indicator? And the performance indicators, we had three categories. Three of them were related to profit, financial performance. Three of them were related to societal performance, so people, and three of them were related to planet, ecological performance. And here you see the results. Let me zoom in on this a little bit. So what were we told? What scores highest, and you probably won't be surprised here to see that, is that the profit-related KPIs, they score highest in terms of both how important are they and in terms of to what extent can digital technology contribute to reaching that performance. The two at the very top being it can contribute to cost reduction and it can contribute to revenue growth. So if you put them together, cost reduction and revenue growth, that gives you profit. Now, that said, the other elements are not unimportant. And if you look at the societal or people-related elements of it, you see that they also, to some extent, are quite important, and that people report to us that digital technology does contribute to reaching it. The one that scores highest in the people-related elements is health and safety. That probably is not coming as a surprise. However, what strikes me looking at this graph is what scores the lowest. The planet-related elements, they score lowest, both in terms of how important they are and to what extent digital technology contributes to it. And what I find most striking is that where circularity is. That's the one at the bottom. So somehow it seems to tell us, despite Tabitha just saying circularity is important, you called it unlocking the value of waste, and you showed a nice example of a circular local supply chain. So despite that, this seems to tell me that many of us don't see the link between digital technology and circularity, although, I believe it's important to think about which technologies, what data, what analytics do we need to be able to manage those circular supply chains very well. So this, I think, is food for thought, and I wanted to share that with you. Now, having, I hope, convinced you that digitalization is important and remains important, the question is, where does your sector stand in terms of digitalization and digital transformation? Now, let me first of all take you back to 2018, when I actually was here presenting the results of a survey that we did back then. And in that survey back then, we asked how digitally mature companies in the petrochemical supply chain were. Those, you may remember, were the early days of digitalization. It was kind of becoming a bit of a hype. And the question was, where are we? And we actually asked back then, is your supply chain, is your sector, is it pioneering, is it at par, or is it lagging with other sectors? The answer, I think, was very, very clear back then. I don't know whether you were here in that session, but this is what we discussed. The majority, 73% of the respondents back then said, we are lagging. There were a few brave ones, actually 4%, if I read that well, who said, we are pioneering in this. Actually, we asked that question to the companies of your sector, but we asked the same question to your customers. And again, Tabitha, you were showing in so many products, your in so many end products, the chemical products end up in. So we were asking the final customers, to what extent do you think this sector is digitalized? Well, that answer was even more clear. 95% of the customers said the petrochemical sector is lagging behind in digitalization. Although I should say the ambition was high. We also asked, in adopting digitalization, our ambition is to be from a laggard. Very few people say we want to be a laggard, so it's not an ambition you want to express, to being an innovator. But if I put all this together, around half of the respondents said, yeah, we want to be, if we're not an innovator, then at least we want to be an early adopter of it. So the ambition was high, but we were lagging at that time. And then another question we then asked is, how close are you to realizing your ambition? You won't be surprised now to hear that many people said, yeah, we actually have just started. That was about half of the group. So let me conclude this, and this is actually a copy of the slide I showed 2018, so that is 7 years ago. The conclusion back then was, as a sector, we're very much aware of the importance and the impact of digitalization, but we were just getting off the starting blocks. And we were really not halfway in the run. The question then is, where are we today? And let me share that with you. Already Sanja was saying that we was referring to the survey that we did. What she actually referred to is a scan that we have developed at Vlerick Business School, a scan that is trying to measure the maturity on digital of companies. And it measures that on a set of 8 dimensions. It looks at, do you have the strategy for it? Do you have the right governance in place? It looks at, do you embed technology? To what extent do you have technology in place? And do you embed it in your processes? Do you use data analytics to understand patterns in data? And a couple of people-related elements. Do you have the right talent in place? Is your culture fit for it? And is your leadership fit for it? Those are the 8 dimensions that we ask questions on in the maturity scan. And by now we have, as you saw earlier already, around 360 companies that have filled out the scan. So what does it tell us? here's what it tells us. On those 8 dimensions that I have just listed, on which we score the companies from 1 being not digitally mature at all, to 5 being very digitally mature, what you can see is the average company scores average. Whoa, what a surprise, right? So we typically score around 3 on 5. The interesting bit lies in the details, of course, and in the differences rather than in the average score. Where do we score highest? I can see my ovals have shifted a little bit, but we score highest, and this is the overall average company, on strategy, on leadership, on culture, and on processes. So we have the strategy in place at the top, all is well. That's what this seems to tell us. Where do we score? Where does the average company score a little bit lower? That is on having data analytics and having the right talent in place. That is the average overall picture that we get, a picture that tells us, I think, that at the top it's fine, but we struggle to have the right people, and we struggle to get data analytics right. Zooming in a little bit on differences between companies, one of the analysis I can show you is the impact of size. So we could distinguish large versus small companies. Now, what do you think? Who would be most digitally mature? The larger companies or the smaller companies? Tell me. The larger companies. Well, yes, indeed. The larger companies being the green line here, you can see that the average large company scores a little bit more digitally mature than the smaller companies. So it tells us that you do need scale. Where's Hans? You were talking about scale. You do need scale to have the resources to be able to invest in the systems, in the resources for digital maturity. Okay, no surprises there. Maybe a little bit more interesting is to find out how your sector scores, and that is what you can see here. So I have now added to the overall benchmark, which is the blue line, I have added the response from the, let's say, EPCA community, chemical companies. That is the red line that you see here. What does it tell us? Well, it tells us that you score pretty close to the benchmark. You score pretty close to the average company. Remember, I was saying 2018, my conclusion was, well, the conclusion of the survey we did was, you're lagging behind, the ambition was high, you got off the starting blocks, but you were not halfway. It looks like you got halfway, at least now. It looks like you've been catching up with the average sector out there, so that's the good news. Interestingly, I think, let me share the next one with you, we could distinguish between what we call the chemical company, or companies reporting being the chemical company, and the logistic providers for the petrochemical sector. Because we also had quite some data on those. And there I think we see an interesting difference. The green line is, I'll call them the logistic companies in the EPCA ecosystem. They score considerably higher in terms of digital maturity than the typical chemical company. So this, I think, points at a unique opportunity, an opportunity to somehow join forces between the petrochemical companies and the logistic companies in the ecosystem to collaborate more on this. And I'll come back to that later. Now, if we collapse the 8 dimensions into one, then this is what we see. And now you see all the sectors that we have data on. Where do we find the chemical sector? Where the overall benchmark is here. The chemical companies are there. The logistic companies in your ecosystem, they score actually the second but highest in our overall data set. So there's something interesting and intriguing there in that data, I believe. Now, that's the lumping all dimensions into one. Let me now zoom in on the dimensions, because behind each of those dimensions there are a set of variables. Actually, there's around 50 variables in total, and I've ranked them here from what gets the highest possible score into down to what gets the lowest possible score overall. I'm sure you cannot read that, that's way too much data here, but let me zoom in on the top 10 and on the bottom 10 for the chemical sector, so for the survey that we did with you. This is the top and the bottom 10 for your sector. What is striking there? What do we see there? I think it's fair to say that the top 10 are mainly related to strategy, to governance, and to culture. So again, you are reporting to me that, if I can oversimplify, but strategy and governance, that's what decided at the top. The culture is defined at the top. So at the top, it's okay. We are digitally mature, we are aware of it. What are the items at the bottom? Well, many of them are related to talent, having the right talent with the right mindset in place. What else is striking here at the bottom 10 is having the IT resources allocated, and at the very, very bottom, having the HR reward and retention programs in place. And actually, there's one more that I wanted to highlight, developing advanced AI technologies. So what this tells me is that there seems to be a little bit of a discrepancy here, or at least an intriguing question comes up. We claim that we have the strategy and the governance for it, or we have it, but when it comes to implementation, we struggle. We struggle with people, we struggle with IT, we struggle with this AI thing, which, yeah, it's important, but how do we embrace it? So when it comes to implementing that strategy, it's difficult. That's, I think, what this tells us. Another way of looking at this is I'm now comparing the top 10 of the companies in the sector and the top 10 of the reported by the logistics companies, which, remember, they score overall higher in terms of maturity than the chemical companies. What does that tell us? Well, at the very, very top of the chemical sector is digital risk management and ethics and a growth mindset. So how do I read that? What actually keeps you awake at night in general today? Risk, we heard resilience, growth, it's difficult, it keeps you awake in general. It's also apparently the focus that you take when it comes to digitalization. It is a bit different if you look at the logistics sector, which, remember, scored higher. What for them is top in terms of what they focus on and what they are mature in is strategy and governance. C-level support is what you see there. So you see a bit of a different focus, I think, here in how we look at digitalization. Now, let me now compare the bottom, the items at the bottom, between, on the one hand, chemical again, and on the other hand, the logistics companies in the EPCA ecosystem. Comparing those, what does that tell me? It tells me HR, I've already pointed your attention to it being low in the chemical companies. Well, it also scores almost at the entire bottom in the logistics companies. So this is something we struggle with, all of us. What else do we see? A culture open to external collaboration and an ecosystem point of view is what scores low in the logistics companies. Where, what do we see on the other side in the chemical companies? The same thing. So I said earlier, remember that there's probably an opportunity here to collaborate, to learn from each other, to share practices, to create platforms together, you name it. But then, if you look at how mature are we on collaboration, on having that ecosystem point of view, we score very low. So to me, that is something where we, that should be an area of attention, and there's work to be done there. So let me conclude. I believe that in order to be more competitive, to cope with all these volatilities, all these disruptions, all these pressures that we all encounter today, we need a more resilient supply chain. That's where we started. And my statement is digitalization helps. The good news is you have clearly advanced in your digitalization journey over the past couple of years. If I listen to what you told me 7 years ago and what you tell me today, I do see a real shift. But there's work to be done still. What is then my advice to you? I would say it's twofold. One comes from that observation that you score high on strategy, you score high on governance, but now it's time to translate that strategy into plans for implementation. Allocating resources, developing talent, focusing on data, on analytics, embracing AI, even if these are difficult times, even if there's pressure on cost today. This is what will determine, or at least contribute, to competitiveness and sustainable growth in all its aspects: people, planet, profit. It's what will make a difference in the long term. That's one advice. And my second piece of advice is, for this to be possible, for this to happen, we need to join forces in the supply chain. Chemical companies, logistic companies, but that requires a mindset that is open to collaboration. I hear the word trust a lot. We need to share data. We have to trust each other to be able to share data, to share platforms, to share practices, you name it. It requires adopting an ecosystem perspective, and that is something that where work is to be done, in my opinion. So with that, I want to conclude my talk. Wish you success also in your continued digitization journey. If I made you a bit enthusiastic to take the scan and you have not done yet, we can share a link, we can share a QR code to the scan. Don't do it now because it's going to take around 15 minutes of your time. But if you would like to know how your company scores and you have not yet taken the scan, you can still do this. You'll get your report automatically. Thank you. Do you need to click?
Thank you so much. Now we are going to be opening approximately 15 minutes panel discussion, followed by a Q&A to receive your questions. And I welcome again my speakers on stage. Hans and Tabitha, you now heard that there is, and I was rightly saying, probably a difference between logistics service providers and other chemical companies, for example, producers, in the maturity of digitalization. What is your personal perspective, and where do you see your company in that? Hans, maybe you start.
It's hard to have the full overview, and I think also what we saw, that it's a small sample size. I don't know where the difference is, but I can speak for at least what I experience within Stolt-Nielsen. I think on logistics, probably there's three things, which is strategy, people, and data, which probably helps us. So if I look, for instance, at the business that I lead, Stolt Tank Containers, it is our strategy, because basically what we do is we are a platform And that means that our customers expect that from booking to documentation to track and trace to invoicing, that's all digital. That's just the experience. So we basically run per year 160,000 tanks over a platform, and that is that is the strategy, which is the point that you mentioned. Then I think there's something around people. Maybe for the company that I lead, we're big enough to scale, but small enough to make it happen. So I mean, it's, you know, in the business there are so many people who really crave this digital exposure and experimentation, but we also have a digital group which is not sitting in the head office. You know, they are out with the business and they're co-located with the business. And you know, when you go to that technology center, they just love the business. So it comes with people that, you know, the team likes digital and digital likes the team. And then stuff really happens and you actually get it implemented, which is the hard part. And the third thing is data, because I think number one and number two, because in logistics, of course, there's all these things happening within the supply chain. You just create an immense amount of data. And because it's a strategy and because you have the people, you can actually do stuff with the data. So at least that's what I see happening in my business. I find it hard to say if we're, you know, more mature than, you know, like for instance, a company like Dow. I think I wouldn't want to claim that.
What would you comment, Tabitha?
Well, I think a couple of perspectives. So, you know, our core is produce product and sell product. And so I think if you look to digital evolutions, our core is also to focus on, you know, how can we digitalize our manufacturing locations. So that's going to be, you know, always our focus. And running a plant requires a lot of capital and making choices to that. If I look to Dow, actually, I think we already started a couple of years ago, you know, moving to e-platforms, to kind of all new digital developments, to make sure that the customers we are serving, we could serve via digital platforms. So I think one hand I see our priority is, of course, to run a plant and produce a product and do that in the, you know, most safe, reliable, and focus on quality. Otherwise, we're also depending on what's happening around us. So improving the supply chain setups, looking at what, you know, the partners are doing, what they're offering. I remember when I was in supply chain, we were talking to the first Uber freight person in Europe, you know, and that was a couple of years ago. There was only one person, and then we were already exploring. So I think there is a lot of interest in our side, but we're very depending on the market and what's being offered, and then, you know, prioritize the capital allocation to that.
Thank you. Anne, when you hear that, is there anything coming to your mind?
It definitely sounds familiar, what I hear Hans and Tabitha say. I think if you look at, in general, the companies that were moved first in terms of digitalization or move fastest in terms of digitalization are the ones closest to the customer. So Tabitha, yeah, if your mind is let's run our plant well, then you are further up in the supply chain. So the pressure comes from the consumer, from the customer, and that's where logistic companies in general, of course, by definition, are closest to that. So that's part of the explanation. The other part of the explanation, I think, lies in what does competition look like? And that's what Hans is hinting at. If you look at the logistics sector in general, not only in your supply chains, the huge difference between logistics of 10, 15 years ago and logistics of today is that there are a couple of players that are purely purely digital players who have no assets whatsoever, who only have data and a platform. You mentioned Uber Freight, it's a nice example, but plenty more even small companies that have disrupted the sector, and that I think explains the higher score that we see.
Thank you. You talked about the importance of the ecosystem approach on. What do you think, or what from your perspective, let's say, being not inside the industry in one of our companies, but seeing it a bit from, let's say, outside, but being closely connected to us. What do you think is blocking us from this ecosystem approach?
The obvious answer to your question is trust. That's the word. If you talk about this to any company in any sector, it's about sharing data, willingness to share data, openness to share data. And the word that pops up within, I bet, 30 seconds is trust in such a conversation. So that is one thing. But there's also something happening much more recently, I think, and that is, and again, your sector is struggling with it, but it's not unique on this. It's this pressure on cost and this huge uncertainty, this threat for will we still be competitive in the future, that is all around, and that is kind of shifting the focus to back to the basics. But then what is the basics? And is this short-term cost focus versus the more longer-term benefits that you get from ecosystem points of view, collaboration? This is more difficult to see where that leads to. It's more long-term perspective. And that I see that in several sectors that we start to kind of hesitate on, what is it now that we should be focusing on? So I guess that those to me are the two blocking factors.
Hans, question to you. You have ideas, you're working with big corporations, big companies like us. There's always a lot of complexity in our organizations as shippers, let's say. Yeah. How do you make sure that you have an effective way how to pitch your ideas in the companies? Which stakeholders are you usually involving in order to get heard with the ideas on how to improve resilience and supply chain?
Yeah. I think actually we have a great deal of these discussions happening with customers. Also because I think, and it's a little bit back to An's point, that supply chain is really a topic people want to talk about. And of course there's in many cases you need to be competitive and there's a cost drive, but there's a lot of questions around what does our supply chain look like? How can we optimize it? What are you guys, of course, also with the products that we move and some of the specific items around, safety and changes in a global landscape. We get a lot of questions from customers, but it's indeed different than a couple of years ago, where probably a couple of years ago we were more as a category, more focused. Well, it works, so let's just make sure it's competitive. Now we're more asked, hey, what do you guys think? And that means that indeed the discussions are happening. I think we're for a long time established in this business, so we know our way around, but now we also see that people know how to find us better. And it means that it's not just talking, for instance, to the local site or to the local procurement team, but it's also indeed more strategic discussions with the supply chain team, with network departments, and I mean it's fantastic kind of the questions that we're getting from customers about, hey, what do you guys think? So it's changing, but we feel more of a pull than a push, so to say. Yeah.
That sounds good. That at least is a positive in all the crises, I would say. So it brings us to collaboration. Tabitha, what would need to happen from your perspective in terms of, or for making circularity more competitive and attractive? So as we also saw in Anne's presentation, circularity sometimes is scored lower. From your perspective, what does need to happen to make it attractive?
Well, in the end, it's all about scale again. So that's going to be important. It takes normally 20 years to get a technology up to scale. So let's be very honest about that. So we will need a bit of time. And in the meantime, I think what we really need is predictability, reliable regulatory framework. If we all know this is coming, it will not change, investments will be done. And then from there you can start growing and scaling up. The other element is, of course, how competitive can we make the new ecosystems around that? And I think that's the opportunity now to kind of start developing these new ecosystems around circularity. And carbon is cost. So if you look to 2040, carbon will be cost. So everything we can do in reducing carbon will make us more competitive. And I truly believe that local supply chains are way more competitive from that perspective. And then, of course, digital, what can we do with the new ecosystems, make them full digital, open, transparent, one European single market. That's what we need, and that's what we also kind of are advocating for in Brussels.
Very good, sounds good. Now we would give the stage to you to ask your questions to the panel and to the speakers. Anybody? Ah, perfect. We need a mic. Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
Morning, Joost Naasens from Cefic. I was triggered by the point on the ecosystem. So if you say that the ecosystem is, you're going back to basics instead of still working around the ecosystem to overcome the crisis. What do we need to do now on the short term to turn that thinking and to try to collaborate again and get the focus right that we will not solve the problems we face today on our own anymore. So what do we need to do? What can Cefic do? Or how do we overcome this trust issue or this lack of priority when it comes to collaborative thinking and ecosystem thinking? What's your advice there?
Anne or me?
And both answer, but I would like to hear it definitely from a company perspective, but also from...
Well, I think you showed some examples of that come very close to this. My honest and sincere answer is talk to each other. Just the fact of realizing this, of knowing that this is important and that we score relatively low on this, is an opportunity to, if it opens your eyes, then you're here. You're all here. So start looking into where are the opportunities? What is it that we miss? What data do we miss? What data does the other one have? And how could that data benefit all of us? Having that understanding is already going to make a difference. It's identifying the opportunities and then get started. I've seen this 15 years ago. Don't take me on the exact date, but I remember being in Frankfurt, also on an EPCA meeting, and talking about the need for collaboration. Back then, it was to improve planning, to reduce working capital. That was the focus back then. Today, we talk about the need for collaboration and we've realized that it's much more than a working capital issue. I've shown it to you, that it has impact on many aspects of competitiveness and of performance. So it's not an easy thing, apparently. It serves multiple purposes. Just get started, I would say.
And perhaps to add, I think what we really need now is one voice in Europe. We cannot afford no longer to be so, not integrated anymore. To the competitiveness on the global scale, we need to be one Europe, one open ecosystem, no borders anymore, one single market. That in the end will really help us. And I think that should also be the voice of everybody here in the room if we talk to Brussels. And that one voice is very important.
More questions?
Oh, sure. Okay. Thank you. Morning, everyone. Tom Brown from ICIS. I was going to ask about trust, actually, so thank you to Cefic for covering that. But in place of that, I was wondering, with this journey, how you picture a digitally mature supply and logistics chain and how that differs from where things are today. Thanks.
Understood the question.
How we see digital maturity.
Well, yes. How you think a digitally mature sector would look compared to how things are today, or how it would be different to how it is now?
It's gonna be one. If you look at the when I collapsed the dimensions into one dimension, into one metric, you saw all the sectors lined up, and you saw the logistics sector being very high. The one that was even higher was the telecom sector, which is, by nature, a digital sector. So if you want to see the extreme, I would say look at how telecom is organized. Now, obviously, of course, we still have products, we have goods, we have things that are tangible. So we need assets, we need trucks, we need tank containers, we need factories. That will always be there. But look at the retail sector. The retail sector was a bricks and mortar sector 20 years ago. Today it's much more a digitalized sector with still some bricks and mortar. So if you want to envision a digital sector in the future, then maybe it helps to look at how that sector has evolved. Would be my 5 cents on that one.
I also think that digital maturity is, of course, the scan helps because you get a sense and you see the supply chain. But digital maturity you also feel on the floor with the people in the teams. So if I can give an example, we had a recent incident where, and I was triggered a bit with the statement that you said from Dow. You know, we're solving problems every day. You know, we had an incident with a tank container where we had to validate some data. When you then see the team coming together, problem solving, but then also using digital solutions and using AI to solve that problem, you know, and then also deploying that with speed. So, for instance, you know, we had to check all the tank containers. We have 53,000 of them. It's a lot. The team got together. You know, how do we fix this? We had AI helping us. So, you know, within 2 weeks, we had a new solution. And it took AI an hour and a half to check 53,000 tanks or something. So I think digital maturity is also, do you see it happening on the floor when you're problem solving? And is that how you work and how you operate? And are you then able to, indeed, at speed implement improvements? And of course, hopefully for your customer, but also, I mean, look at some of the stuff we do. If we can make the world a bit better, a bit safer, a bit more sustainable, you know, digital can do a lot. So I think maturity is also indeed how we work.
Yeah, and it's about an open mindset to identify those opportunities where a digital tool can help. In negotiating with suppliers, for example. Some part of it, you might as well let the bot do it, but then there are some elements where the human really adds value to it. So I'm not advocating for everything should all of a sudden be digital. No. But where can I use AI? Am I using it to the best possible purpose? Am I bringing in the person for what the person can do best? It's identifying those opportunities.
There's still room for 1 or 2 questions, if you have some.
Thank you. So my name is Michiel Stork. I work for consultancy Guidehouse and am tomorrow's moderator on the session of whether the journey towards net zero can go hand in hand with competitiveness. So I'm a little bit worried to see that for digitization, sustainability kind of scored lowest. And my question is sustainability in digitization just a simple add-on to the strategy, something you take on board anyhow? Or is it something you would really need to set up separately, if you see what I mean? In other words, how easy is it to also arrange it for sustainability?
So your question is, how do you integrate the net zero journey into your strategy like you do with digital?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And well, I think for a company like us with what we do with transportation, you know, of course, sustainability is super important. And there also, and indeed it sounds like we cannot do it alone. So actually the insights and the data that I showed you in terms of optimizing for cost is the same insights and data that you can use for optimizing for sustainability. Now, especially specifically in transportation and logistics, we need to get to net zero. And that's a very big theme that, of course, we as an industry need to solve. What we as a company can do together with you is basically we can take the first 50% of CO2 reductions we can do by floating the product the most efficient way. Move from truck to rail to barge, making sure it's highly utilized, reducing empty miles, using alternative fuels, all those kind of things. So I think the story that I just showed you in terms of optimizing for cost is very much hand in hand the data you also note to do on sustainability. If you go online on our website and you book a tank container, you can see the price, you can see the CO2 emissions. But what it does require is that indeed we use the data and we sit together. And what I see is that especially now in a time of significant cost competitiveness, that's kind of a, it's becoming a second thought. And I think it's going to be interesting for your discussion to see how do we now do both. How do we now spend time analyzing the flows to really be competitive in Europe? But how do we then also, at the same time look and say, oh, we've done, yes, we need to have an alternative fuel and we need to get to net zero. What can we do here and now to optimize our CO2? Because the data is there and is available to work with.
Yeah, I agree. I think it has to be an integral part of your strategy. And the pressure that we feel today, and again, not only in your sector, makes us hesitate about it, makes us think about, maybe our costs will increase if we become more sustainable. But in the long term, this is not something cost-related only, it's also something revenue-related. To be able to still sell, you'll need to be more sustainable. So this tension between sustainable on the one hand and costs on the other hand should not be there, and we have to find ways to get beyond that so that we realize there's also some sustainability practices reduce your costs. So maybe identifying those first could already help to get again in that mood towards better performance on it, because it's not either or, it will have to be and.
All right. Thank you so much for doing the session today together. It was a very diverse content, very practical content, and a very good update on digitalization that concerns us all, of course. Thank you very much for coming. It was nice to see you. If you want to hear more about the SCPC, you can always reach out to me and to the SCPC members being here. We still have 2 sessions today. You see them on the screen, where we are happy to see you. And outside now, if you want to grab a coffee and some snacks, we have still something, and it's sponsored by Ovinto. And in general, thank you again to our sponsors. Without them, it's not happening here. And of course, thank you to EPCA and to our crew to be organizing everything. So far, it went very well, I think. And I wish all of you a lovely day.